The Amaravati School of Art, Andhra Stupas as sites of transformation. Hello everyone, myself Paritosh Chauhan. I am currently pursuing my graduation in history from St. Stephen's College, University of Delhi. This is my research turned presentation on Amaravati School of Art. Amaravati, located in modern Guntur district, Andhra Pradesh, on the banks of the Krishna River, was a prominent Buddhist center in ancient India. The site flourished for nearly 17 centuries, from the 3rd century BC to the 14th century AD, before being abandoned and buried under layers of dust and debris. Rediscovered in the late 18th century by a local zamindar and later documented by Colonel Colin Mackenzie, its excavation ironically led to its gradual disappearance. The stupa stones were repurposed for new buildings, used for lime, or taken to museums in Madras and London, leaving little trace to its original grandeur. While scholars attempted to reconstruct its lost design, the site itself steadily diminished. Andhra Buddhism thrived through merchant and artisan patronage, fostering grassroots expansion and integrating local traditions like goddess worship and Naga veneration. Amravati, its spiritual hub, birthed Mahayana Buddhism and Naga Arjuna's Madhyamika philosophy, influencing Buddhist thought across Asia. However, by the mid first millennium CE, shift in patronage to Shaivism, economic decline, and later Islamic influence led to its decline, though its legacy endured in art, philosophy, and global Buddhism. The Amaravati Stupa, the largest in Andhra Pradesh, reflects the region's economic surplus and extensive trade, supported by the ancient port of Dharni Tota on the Krishna River. Buddhism thrived here from the Mauryan period with a literate and organized society. Amravati marked a significant artistic transition from anatonic to anthropomorphic representations of the Buddha. In early Buddhism, the Buddha was depicted through symbols like footprints, the Bodhi tree, or Dharma Chakra, that is, the wheel of Dharma, known as anatonic representation. However, by the later period, artists began portraying him in human form or anthropomorphic representation, reflecting changing religious and artistic sensibilities. The stupa's sculptural ornamentation, initially influenced by Barhut and Sanchi, 3rd to 4th century BCE, was further enriched under the Satavahanas, 2nd to 3rd century CE, and later the Ikshvakus, who also adorned the stupa at Nagarjun Konda. Now, these are some of the plausible designs of stupa. This one is the stupa observed by Colonel Colin Mackenzie in March 1817. This is the first design of Amravati stupa that we have. This is the stupa by Walter Elliot, 1845 or after. This one is the stupa's reconstruction by James Ferguson, drawn before 1869. And these are some other designs of stupa. Now, why am I showing you all these possible designs? Because at present, we don't have Amravati stupa in its physical form. What we have is its remaining sculptures and drum slabs which are stored and preserved in the stupas of in the museums of India and abroad. The stupa is deteriorated and completely destroyed due to the conquest by the Islamic rulers and later the conservation attempts by the archaeologist. So after seeing all these possible stupas design, we have a question in our mind: will the real Mahachaitya please stand up? Talking about the Amaravati School of Art, a testament to indigenous Buddhist aesthetics. The style, The sculptures at Amravati have a profound and quiet naturalism in human, animal, and floral forms. There is a sense of movement and energy in the sculptures. The human figures are slender and slightly elongated. The faces are oval with sharp and well delineated and expressive features, unlike the rounded contours of body in Mathura. The animals, such as mataras, which are crocodiles, have scaly naturalism and vegetation environment is lush. The Amravati style is distinguished by its dynamic Tribhanga posture, where figures are sculpted with three delicate bends, unlike the Mathura and Gandhara schools, which absorbed Hellenistic and Persian influences. Amaravati style remains rooted in indigenous traditions. The content. There is a great emphasis on the narrative element with stories from the life of Buddha and Bodhisattva dominate in such episodes relating to the birth, the miracles, enlightenment, and the victory over Mara, Sundari, and Nanda, Tushita Haven, Angulimala. There are few Jataka scenes such as the Shibi, Nalagiri, and Chadanta Jatakas. Talking about the influence, the perfection of form and proportion seen in the middle phase of Amravati, as well as some of their themes continued to influence art at Nagarjun Konda and also later Vatatakas and the Gupta art style. Now I will come to some of the illustrations of Amravati. So this is an illustration of a votive stupa from outside the great stupa and shows a rendering of the early stupa. Its core is Mauryan and then built on by early Satavahanas and elaborated later by the late Satavahanas and then the Ishvakus. The period of the great Satavahanas, 2nd and 3rd century CE, is considered to be the mature phase of Amravati. Now I'll show you some of the railing pillars. Here we have two sides of relatively chronological earlier phase of the railing pillar. On the inner face it is carved and on the outer face we have the padmas or the lotuses. This is the another railing pillar with the inner and outer phases. In the outer phase, we have Padmas, but also the worship of the stupa. On the inner phase, we can see three scenes. The central scene is probably the enlightenment and the worship of the Bodhi tree by various devotees. Buddha has been carved on the empty throne. Now we will see a transition from the aniconic phase that we saw previously to the phase where we can see the great departure where the Buddha is leaving his palace and going to Gaya. He is riding his horse Tantaka because it is a divine being. The legs of the horse are not allowed to touch the ground. We have dwarfs holding the legs of the horse. There are people who are celebrating as well as lamenting the departure. Underneath, there is also another scene, probably from the life of the Buddha, related to the interpretation of Maya's dream of or another episode which can be seen on the side where we can see the Dharma Chakra representing his first sermon at Sarnath. Here at the top, Buddha is being venerated by various kind of figures. On the bottom part is a scene where Buddha is being prevented from leaving his palace by various ladies of the harem. This illustrates one episode from the Buddha Charita where Shuddhodana, father of Buddha, gets to know that his son is contemplating leaving the palace and he sends all the beautiful ladies of the harem to tempt him. But Buddha, of course, remains steadfast. Now we'll come to some of the roundels. So this is a roundel depicting the Mandhata Jataka. The story goes like Mandhata was a rich and prosperous Chakravartin or universal emperor who had ruled the world for thousands of years, who grew dissatisfied, having realized every conceivable desire that the mortal world could offer. Thus, he decided to include heaven in his realm. Next, he aspired to the highest of the heavens, Shatra, the Pali Buddhist equivalent for Indra. The king of the gods himself came to receive him in full state and offered to share his throne with Mandhata. It is this movement that is depicted here, the heaven of Indra with all celestial nymphs and the gods surround the two main protagonists, but he remained discontent, came back to earth, and died. Buddha explains that the desire is ever increasing, but desire never leads to happiness. This is our third century roundel depicting the worship of a reliquary. The relic casket sits on a throne. The most important figure seems to be the Nagaraj. The whole scene probably refers to the story where the Nagas or serpents received one share of the Buddha's relics. This is Amaravati crossbar, 3rd century AD, a railing crossbar called Suchi, carved in limestone on its inner narrative face with monks, ascetics, and laity worshipping the Buddha represented as a pillar of fire surmounted by a Triratana symbol. The whole scene is bordered with a narrow zone of lotus petals. Here, interesting thing to notice is Buddha is shown in his anatonic form as a pillar of fire. This is a roundel. So here, the story of the taming of the fierce elephant Nalagiri is depicted. The sculpture shows on the left the elephant doing havoc in the street. The people on the balcony watch the scene below. On the right, the animal is shown kneeling before the Buddha, who is represented by the flaming pillar. Here we see depiction of probably enlightenment or the worship of the Bodhi tree, where the empty seat and footprints represent the Buddha in his aniconic form, and there are women as well as male devotees crouched around the tree. The parasol also depicts the sovereignty and presence of Buddha. This is a drum slab, a stupa drum slab carved in limestone in two horizontal registers with the images of the Chakravartin or universal monarch. The upper register shows the standing Chakravartin with his right hand raised to the heavens to create a shower of coins. He is flanked by four attendants and his horse and elephant. The lower register shows the Chakravartin seated on a throne with his queen, parasol bearer, wheel of sovereignty, minister, and horse and elephant. Two kneeling supplicants present a tray to the king on which are indistinct objects, probably money and precious gem. Here, I would like to point out that there has been a kind of misunderstanding about Amravati. A lot of people call the stones of Amravati as marble, but these are not marble, but whitish green limestone that is easier to carve. This is a limestone drum slab with carving on two sides. This relief has been carved on both sides at different times. The earlier carving, dating from approximately the 1st century BC, shows a group of men worshipping at the spot where the Buddha received enlightenment. On the other side is an elaborately carved stupa from the 3rd century AD. The scene of the enlightenment shows an empty throne under the Bodhi tree. At the base of the throne are a pair of Buddha padas or footprints of the Buddha bearing dharma chakras or the wheel of law set in motion by the Buddha's first sermon. Five worshippers surround the throne and a pair of kinnaras or semi-divine beings hover above the tree. The empty throne, the footprints, the umbrella above the throne, and the decorations on the sacred tree all symbolically refer to the Buddha, who is pointedly not represented as a human figure. Here, interestingly, we see replication of the stupa itself in the art of Amravati. The stupas as it exists with the five ayata pillars, the railing, the carving on the drum slab, and the garlands on the top of the dome, all of these are depicted and replicated in the stupa itself. Here we can see that the Dharma Chakra with the Triratana is on the top. There is a line of animals. The third register at the bottom shows the stupa parasols, which symbolizes sovereignty and worship of Buddha. This is a limestone panel depicting the Buddha Pada in early period of Buddhist sculpture in India. The Buddha was not represented as a human figure. Instead, he was indicated through anatonic symbols like the Buddha Pada or Buddha's footprints serve such a purpose. This is a coping stone. These are the stones that unite the entire reading in one compositional scheme. Here we will see various scenes from the life of Buddha. The first one is the Buddha leaving. Second, the Buddha achieving enlightenment. The third one is the Buddha being threatened by the army of Mara and how the Mara with his elephant is entering into the scene. This is again a very important panel known as the Nanda panel. The reason because it tells a story of Sundari and Nanda eulogized in a long kavya Sundarananda by Ashwaghosh. The king Nanda, who is the cousin of Buddha, is spotted with his wife Sundari in the palace. As he is spotted with his wife, Buddha himself comes and asks for alms. But Nanda is too busy and do not pay attention to Buddha. Later, he was persuaded to leave his wife and palace and the world and become a monk. This is again a very important narrative relating to the birth of Buddha. The first scene on the top right depicts the sleeping queen Maya who dreams of Buddha descending into her womb as a white elephant from the Tushita heaven. She is reclining in a couch and all her attendant ladies of the harem are around her. The next panel on the left of this, we will see it as the interpretation of the dream by astrologers of the courts, especially a sage called Ashita. Underneath this, in the bottom right, depicts the birth of Buddha in the Lumbini forest. Queen Maya Devi, holding the branch of a shala tree with her hands, gave birth to Buddha, who we can't see, but the presence of Buddha can be made out by the footsteps on the cloth and is received by various gods like Indra, Surya, etc. As soon as he was born, he walked 7 steps marked on the cloth. On the bottom left shows Maya taking the baby to the clan's Yaksha Shakyavardhana, a platform with offerings around it underlined the sacredness of the tree in which he resides. This is a limestone relief panel depicting the great departure of Prince Siddharth, 2nd century AD. Here, the empty horse with the parasol represents the Buddha leaving his horse Tantaka. I would like to point out the gate or Torana, which is very much like the one in Sanchi. So, the architecture that has been depicted in various monuments, such as Amaravati, is representation of the actual monuments. So, the gate, which we can see here, it is actually resembling the Torana or gateway of Sanchi Stupa. Now we have a question how Amaravati School of Art is different from the Gandhara and Mathura School of Art. So, for Amravati, for the Gandhara art, we have a time period of 50 BC to 500 AD. For Mathura, we have a time period of 1st and 3rd centuries AD. And for Amravati, we have a time period of 2nd century BCE to 3rd century AD. Here I have included only Gandhara and Mathura art because we have already seen the representations and the narratives of the Amravati art before. Next is the external influence. So in Gandhara school, we find heavy influence of Greek or Hellenistic sculpture. So it is also known as Indo-Greek art. In Mathura school, we find that it is developed indigenously and is not influenced by external cultures. In Amravati also, we say it was developed indigenously and was not influenced by any external cultures. Ingredient used: early Gandhara school used bluish grey sandstone, while the later period saw the use of mud and stucco. In Mathura school, we find the sculptures of the school made using spotted red sandstone, and in Amaravati, as I told before, the sculptures were made using the whitish green limestone. uh, Talking about the religious influence, in Gandhara we find mainly Buddhist imagery influenced by the Greco-Roman pantheon. In Mathura we find the influence of all three religions of the time, that is Hinduism, Jainism and Buddhism. In Amravati we find only the Buddhist influence particularly. Talking about the patronage, both Gandhara and Mathura school was patronized by Kushana rulers, while Amravati school was patronized by Satvana rulers and later by the Chwatu dynasty. Area of development: Gandhara school, from the name itself, we can say it developed in the northwest frontier region or in the modern day area of Kandahar. Mathura school developed in and around Mathura, Sonk, and Kantali Tila in Uttar Pradesh. Now, I need to mention that Kantali Tila was also famous for its Jain sculptures. Amravati school developed in the Krishna Godavari lower valley in and around Amaravati and Nagarjun, Tonda in Andhra Pradesh. Amravati art is also known as Venri art or Venri school. The features of this school are also seen in different places of Andhra Pradesh, like the stupa remains at Jagarapetta, Dolli Dhantasala, etc. Then the features of Buddha sculpture. In Gandhara, we find Buddha is shown in a spiritual state with wavy hair. He wears fewer ornaments and seated in a yogi position. The eyes are half closed, as in meditation. A protuberance or halo is shown on the head, signifying the omniscience of Buddha. In Mathura school, we find Buddha is shown in a delighted mood with a smiling face. The body symbolizes masculinity, wearing a tight dress. The face and head are shaven. Buddha is seated in a Padmasana with different mudras and his face reflects grace. A similar protuberance is shown on the head. In Amravati school, we find the sculptures are generally part of a narrative art. Therefore, there is a less emphasis on the individual features of Buddha. The sculptures generally depict life stories of Buddha and the Jataka tales, that is, previous lives of the Buddha in both human and animal form. Talking about the iconography, in Gandhara we see Buddha often shown with the mustache, Urna, that is a forehead mark, and Ushnisha, that is top knot. In Mathura, we find Ushnisha is prominent, Urna as a dot, often with a lion throne or attendants. In Amravati, we see symbolic motifs like lotus, wheel, stupa, and later Buddha with elongated earlobes. Examples of each of the art includes Bamiyan Buddhas, Tatsila sculptures, stand-in Buddha statues of Gandhara. In Mathura, we have seated Buddha at Tatra, Keshavdev, Yatshi figures, and Vishnu statues. In Amravati, we have the famous, well-known Amaravati Stupa reliefs and Nagarjun Konda's carving. Now I'll focus on the Sriparvata Arama Project, reviving Buddhist heritage and creating and crafting a legacy. The Sriparvata Arama, located on the left bank of the Krishna River at Nagarjun Sagar, is a 279-acre project aimed at reviving the Buddhist heritage of the Telugu region. Conceived in 2001 With support from the Indian government and Andhra Pradesh, it serves as more than a tourist attraction. It is a tribute to the lost Amaravati School of Art. The project seeks to preserve cultural memory, educate the public, and recreate Buddhist art, architecture, and symbolism, ensuring the legacy of this sophisticated artistic tradition endures. This is the Mahastupa under construction of the Sriparvata Arama Nagarjun Sagar. This is the Dharmachakra or Wheel of Law of the Sriparvata Arama Nagarjun Sagar. In conclusion, I would like to say that today, those interested in getting a glimpse of the former magnificence of the Amaravati Stupa can venture into the portals of the Madras Museum, the British Museum in London, or the small museum at Amaravati itself. They can leaf through catalogs and publications on the subject produced by these museums. However, the result of a century and three quarters of explorations and excavations at Amravati is that today the site of one of the greatest Mahachaityas of ancient India is marked by a nondescript mound ringed by a few forlorn stones. Thank you.